Hello everyone, welcome to this new deck tech video, and today we're going to talk about Krennic Green, the ultimate control deck. The control deck, in my opinion, the most powerful control deck that you're going to find typically in the meta. So if you're a control player, this is the video for you. So as you can see here, we got the list, and basically the idea of the deck is pretty much to either stall the game by being able to use very powerful and efficient removal, or if nothing happens, or if your opponent does not put a lot of pressure on you, ramp, in order to access into the late game faster. So we have the ramp plan or the control plan. Usually the control plan, is what we're going to be playing against aggressive players. So we're going to be really trying to block the board with sentinels and then use removal to kill their units. And if we're playing against a more passive opponent, we're going to be trying to ramp to get to the late game faster than he or she can. So and then of course we're going to overwhelm our opponent with very powerful late game cards. Cast to Overwhelming Barrage, the Vanquish, the Super Laser Blast, the Reinforcement Walker, and in my opinion, the best Darth Vader in the game. And yeah, that's pretty much the deck. So why do we choose Krennic as so? Something I really like to do whenever I'm approaching a control deck is to very much take into account the meta. Whenever you're seeing any control list, for that matter, nothing is set in stone, and always adapt the list to your local meta. And make adjustment depending on this. You might want to play some of those cards in the sideboard, and play some of the side cards in the main deck, depending on your meta. You might be playing all the cards. So really, the game plan is a reactive game plan. It's a plan where you are reacting to what your opponent is doing, and the deck building should be the same. The deck building should be reactive to what other players are playing. So whenever I'm designing a proactive list, like the Sabine aggro that we've already seen, or even the Vader deck, which in a lot of sense is a very proactive game plan, then in this case things are a little bit more set in stone in terms of what you want to play. But whenever you're playing a reactive list like Krennic, you really want to adapt yourself to what the other players are doing around you. So I want you to visualize this list as a reactive and as dynamic and fluid, rather than something that is really set in stone. And just to illustrate what I want to say, I'm going to show you this next picture here. So I've highlighted in green the core cards of the deck that pretty much are always going to be there no matter what, even after sideboard. In yellow, we are seeing the card that is more meant to beat Boba, and I'll explain into more details how that's the case. In red, sorry, we have the anti-aggro cards, and in blue we have the late game, super powerful late game payoff card, which are going to be useful to seal the deal, and also are kind of anti-control cards as well. So this is kind of a good example here of what I mean. So the proportion of red card as opposed to yellow card as opposed to blue card is going to change depending on what kind of deck you're facing. And this is really a good way to visualize building a control deck. So this is kind of an example, but of course we're going to get into more details after this. But before we do anything else, let's first take a look at the leader himself, Director Krennic. So Director Krennic has many advantages as a leader. First of all, his leader ability is very strong. This is something that a lot of people at the beginning of the game were kind of not thinking very highly of Krennic, because they thought that to take advantage of his ability you really needed to play a dedicated self-damage deck. And after a lot of playtests, and notably the work of a player who's been playing a lot of Krennic during the spoiler season, which is who is Faith. So that player actually did play a lot of Krennic, and this player was one of the first who brought Krennic on a competitive tournament. And what he showed us is that the passive ability of Krennic is very powerful, even without building around him, because throughout the course of the game units are going to get damage, and they're going to get that +1 attack bonus, which makes a huge difference to put pressure on your opponent, yes, but also for those units to be able to kill the enemy units, and also to provide better and more powerful overwhelming barrage. So it's a very, very powerful ability. It's also very powerful with Death Trooper, which we'll see later. But basically, think about this ability as a passive buff that doesn't require any action to be used, doesn't require any effort whatsoever, no resources, and that's going to be tremendously useful throughout the course of the game, just naturally, just by being there. You don't even need to build around it specifically. As a leader unit, Krennic is just a very good control leader because he comes into play relatively early, which, as I said in my leader video, leaders that deploy early are often better than the one that deploy late, because having this extra free unit earlier in the game gives you a huge snowballing advantage throughout the game. And his Restorer is extremely precious in a control deck. His ability to heal your base is super relevant. And the fact that he has 7 HP means it's relatively difficult to kill, so he's likely to stay on the battlefield for a long time and heal your base multiple times. And not only that, of course, he's also very likely to get his +1 attack bonus from being damaged, making a 3 attack unit that will be able to kill a unit when needed. So he's just an extremely good leader once deployed. There's a big caveat to this, but first of all, I'm going to talk about the other leader that is often compared to Krennic for good reasons, and it is Iden Versio. So a lot of people say, well, Iden Green is the strongest control deck, not Krennic. And basically, those two decks are basically the same deck. So I'm going to come back to the list. Pretty much, if you're playing the Iden Green deck, you are almost playing the same cards if you're playing a Krennic Green. So when people say Iden Green or Krennic Green, the reality is that those two decks are pretty much the same decks. So in my opinion, the choice is not really a difference of deck, but just the leader himself. Do you prefer to play Krennic, and do you prefer to play Iden? And this has a big impact, but both leaders do very similar things. They are both leaders that are mostly going to make you build a blue-black deck, and they both have the ability to heal you. So in what situation do I prefer Krennic? What situation do I prefer Iden? So I'm just going to give you the pro and cons for each of the leaders. So basically, the advantage of Iden is that she does have a better stat than Krennic. So 4/4 with shield is better than 2/7. 4, she can actually kill relatively large things by herself without needing to be damaged first. She is a very excellent target for overwhelming barrage because she can do overwhelming barrage at 6. So that's pretty much like and the shield means that she can be relatively awkward to kill against certain cards. It is relatively awkward to kill for certain decks. So, for example, if you're not attacking with Iden on other unit and you're focusing on just attacking on the base with Iden becomes very difficult to kill for certain decks. And basically, Iden is going to be and there's also some situation where Iden can heal more than Krennic, especially in the control matchup where Krennic is going to be killed relatively quickly, and Iden is able to heal you throughout the whole duration of the game, not only when she's on the battlefield. She doesn't heal a lot, but she can sometimes heal more than Krennic. So basically, my estimation is that an Iden will heal you between 4 and 5 HP per game, while Krennic is also kind of the same, between 4 and 6. Depending on 4 is basically if he gets to attack 2 times, which is very realistic. But obviously there's going to be a situation where Iden is going to heal more than Krennic, and Krennic is going to be more than Iden. It's really depend on the situation. But I've seen a lot of Iden games, and every time I've seen Iden games, I do the effort of recording the amount of healing she does, and she doesn't heal as much as people think. So the idea that Iden heals more than Krennic is not always true, and more importantly, it is not true in the matchup in which healing is the most important, which is the aggro matchup, because typically in aggro, the aggro player does not want to kill Krennic really, because he's just so difficult to kill with the 7 HP, and it's a lot of resources for the aggro player to try to kill Krennic. And if Krennic stays on the battlefield, he's always going to heal more than Iden, and more importantly, he deploys earlier, which is a big deal. So these are the So now let's talk about the advantage of Krennic. So Krennic advantages are that he deploys earlier than Iden, and that's a huge deal in almost every matchup, but especially against aggro. The second major advantage of Krennic is like his passive ability is more powerful than Iden. The ability for Iden to sometimes pass her turn and gain like 1 HP every once in a while is not as useful as the passive +1 attack buff, especially when you play a Death Trooper. Like Death Trooper is so much better in a Krennic deck than it is in in an Iden deck. Not only that, you can also with Krennic in combination with Vader, with Death Trooper in combination with Vader, if you're playing this in a Krennic deck, you can deal 8 damage, which is super relevant in the Vader matchup, for example. Well, we're going to go through into more details as we get to them. But another very big advantage of Krennic is is the passive ability, as I said earlier. So what is the weakness of Krennic? Well, one of the big argument against Krennic has been that Krennic gets out countered by Steadfast Battalion. So the Steadfast Battalion Energy Conversion Nap combo will one-shot Krennic, and that's a big deal because if Krennic gets one-shot, then you can't really heal. And that's a big deal because nowadays Sabine Green players play a lot of Steadfast Battalion. So my opinion about this is that yes, it's a big deal, and this is a strong argument in favor of Iden, depending on what kind of meta you're playing with. But at the end of the day, this is something you can play around. First of all, if your opponent does not have ECL available, Steadfast Battalion doesn't do much. If your opponent it's something that you can very much play around, and it is very worth it to delay the deployment of your Krennic if you think that Steadfast Battalion is coming, and then your opponent has to keep 5 resources up. So what happened is that you can play your turn normally, see if your opponent deploys anything. If your opponent decides to not play anything, you can say, okay, sure, I won't deploy Krennic. I will pass. And the opponent has 2 choices. Either he has to play the Steadfast Battalion, in which case you can then deploy the Krennic and your Krennic is safe, or you can just decide to say, the opponent can decide to say, take the initiative, and then suddenly your opponent has wasted 5 resources. So there's ways you can play around this, and not get just blown out by Steadfast Battalion. You just need to know it exists, and that most green lists that has a leader that costs 5 or less will often have it. With ECL, of course. So it's something that you got to keep in mind. And obviously, if you're in a meta where everybody plays Steadfast Battalion, maybe it's a good idea to play Iden. So basically, as I said, is like I have a preference for Krennic, but it really depends on a lot of factors. And they're both excellent choice anyway for control deck. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the card from the cheapest to the most expensive. So on the 2 drops, we got the Seasoned Shore Trooper. Always an excellent card, comes into play, especially in the more grindy control matchup. Comes to play, and then as the game progresses, we play a lot of ramp. We get to 6 resources easily, and we can play the Overwhelming Barrage on it. Excellent target for Overwhelming Barrage. So if you've already seen my video on Vader, there's a lot of cards that those 2 decks share, so I'm not going to get into too much details about them. Viper Pop Droid is pretty much an anti-aggro early play that it can trade with the Steadfast with the Battlefield Marine, trade with the Sabine. And that's just something that is very important to do when you're playing against aggro, to be able to trade with the early game drops. And also take a pick at the opponent hand is also very good in the context of a control deck. Next we got Inferno 4. Inferno 4 is going to be our early play into space. We need space presence to answer aggro. And at the same time, this gives you like some card selection, which is very important for aggro, because once again we're going to be looking for the specific answers to deal with a specific matchup, and it gives you board presence in space, so it's an absolute auto-include in all blue-black deck. Just an excellent card. Next we got the Scout Barrack Pursuer. So Scout Barrack Pursuer is a card that I'm a bit more on the fence on. It's a card that I think is very useful, that is not so useful against aggro, because it doesn't really kill anything. And it's a card that I think if I want to play this card, I really want to combine it with Death Trooper. I think it's an excellent card in combination with Death Trooper, but without Death Trooper, it doesn't feel as good. Because what's going to happen if you now don't have the Death Trooper is that you're going to trade with your opponent units, and then you're going to attack the opponent unit to damage yourself, and then the opponent is just going to trade with your Scout Pursuer, and that's going to be about it. So it's a little bit awkward to play sometimes, and that's why I only play 2. But it's an excellent card. Obviously, it's extra good with Krennic because you get the +1 attack on top of the grit, which can make this card a very big menace on the opponent. But it's a bit more situational. That's why I only like to include 2. Next we go into the 3-drop, and we get into one of the best cards in the deck, which is Death Trooper. Death Trooper is so much better in a Krennic deck than it is in an Iden deck, because he's basically become a 4-1 for 3 instead of a 3-1 for 3 that deals 2 damage. So obviously he only deals 2 damage to enemy ground units, which is a bit awkward sometimes when the opponent does not have any ground units. But the card is so excellent when the opponent happens to have any units on the battlefield. It's even if it's just damaging the unit and then getting a 4-1, it's still very much worth it. It's one of the best cards to use with Energy Conversion Lab. Your opponent has a damage unit and a unit in play. Energy Conversion Lab, kill the unit that is damaged, then ambush the other units, and as something as big as and then can kill something as big as a K2SO, which is just a huge blowout. It's just an excellent card in the deck. It's one of the best card to find out of Darth Vader as well, and we'll get into more details when we get to Darth Vader. But it's just an excellent card in this deck. Then we got obviously Cell Block Guard, which is an excellent card against aggro, just to block the board. It's an excellent card to find out of Darth Vader. It is more important in this deck than it is in. It just like in any control deck that plays black should be playing Cell Block Guard, because it's gonna do so much for you, like block the board and be an excellent card in general. Then we got obviously our ramp package, so Super Laser Technician. So something I want to say about ramp in this deck is that ramp in this deck is not as powerful as it is in Invader, because obviously Invader you are ramping towards stronger cards, but you're also ramping towards your leader, while in Krennic basically what you need really is the ramp on turn 2, but after the ramp on turn 2 all subsequent ramp is not as beneficial because it doesn't bring you closer to your Krennic. So being able to deploy Krennic 1 turn earlier is a huge deal. Being able to deploy, of course, other powerful card is a huge deal. Super Laser Technician into Energy Conversion Lab is still an excellent way to ramp yourself while stabilizing the game. So it just is an excellent card. It's just a very powerful card in this deck. Just keep in mind that in this deck, as opposed to the Vader deck, that really one of the advantages of that approach is that Krennic typically doesn't care as much about ramp, meaning that he's not dependent as much on the ramp. If you do not find ramp in your opening hand, it's not as big of a deal in a Krennic deck as it is in a Vader deck, where you really depends on that ramp to really be able to operate properly. Next we got Consortium Star Viper, which is one of the anti-aggro tech card that I have. Basically, without this card, the deck is very vulnerable in space, because we basically have no other space units. So outside of the Infernal Foe, that doesn't really kill anything. So my advice is that either play Consortium Star Viper or System Patrol Craft. If you're not playing an either of those cards, you're going to be very vulnerable into space. I mean, obviously you got loads of removal events that can be used in space, but you're going to need some space presence. But in the issue of the game, Star Viper is excellent with ECL. You can go ECL, kill an A-Wing, get some HP back. This is really an excellent card against aggro. And if you're not playing against aggro, you can simply resource the card. Next we got Resupply. So this is the other ramp card. As I said, there's situations where I would rather play Resupply than Super Laser Technician, especially in this deck, where we don't have the ability like Invader to kill our own Super Laser Technician. There's going to be some situation where Resupply is better than Super Laser Technician. So it's just an excellent card, and he has the same role as Super Laser Technician, preferably playing on turn 2 to bring the Krennic 1 turn earlier. But obviously, any later in the game can also be useful to play a Vader faster, play a Reinforcement Walker faster, or also play a Super Laser Blast faster. Then we got one copy of System Patrol Craft, which is here to support the space effort. It's a card that is not super flashy, but it does something that no other card in the deck can do, which is blocking the space arena. There's simply no other card in the game that can really do that. The 3/4 stat line is not super flashy once again, but it is more than enough to keep at bay most of the aggressive 2-drop in the game, including Red 3. Just an excellent anti-aggro card. We play 1 in the main deck and 2 additional ones in the sideboard. Then into the 5-drop we got Gideon Ask. So Gideon Ask, I'm not a big fan of Gideon in a deck that doesn't play ECL, because we're talking about a 5-drop that doesn't have immediate impact on the game. But with ECL, the card becomes a lot better because we can ambush it, attack with it, kill something right away, and trigger his ability right away and give an experience token to a friendly unit right away, which that unit can be himself, by the way. So Gideon is, I think, really good with ECL. It's a card that you come into play, kill something that has 5 HP, gain an experience token, and gain an experience token, and basically another thing to note is if you ambush with Gideon and Gideon dies as a result of that ambush, you're still allowed to give the experience token as long as this is a different unit. Also, this unit will also get +1 attack from Krennic, so you end up with a unit with a lot of attacks that needs to be dealt with, because if it's not dealt with, it's going to be a card that can set up a huge barrage and becomes even more powerful. It's a card that says answer me or die, and it has an immediate impact thanks to ECL. Next we got Traitorous. As you guys know, I'm a pretty big fan of this card. I think it's one of the best 5 cost card in the game. Excellent to deal with things that are with 3 drops very efficiently, kill something, and allows us to get a unit under our own control. Once again, stealing enemies, Super Laser Technician is one of the strongest play you can make in this game. It's a card that can flip games upside down, and it's a card that also opponent is always going to have to consider throughout the game, which is by itself very valuable. Then we got Steadfast Battalion, which is our anti-7 HP leaders. Krennic, one of the advantages that Krennic has over Aiden is that Aiden cannot play Steadfast Battalion because she comes into play too late. But Krennic comes into play on turn 4, which allows us on the same turn to use Steadfast Battalion using ECL to ambush the opponent leaders and get yourself a 7/7 attack. So if you're afraid of enemy Steadfast Battalion, what you can do is simply take the initiative, deploy Krennic. Your opponent has then no other choice than to, if he wants to use his own Steadfast Battalion, he's going to have to deploy his leader, and then this is where you use the Steadfast Battalion to kill your opponent leader, and then suddenly the opponent Steadfast Battalion cannot ambush your leader. So this is something you can do if you're playing against a Boba, for example. You can't do the same against Sabine, because Sabine will be in play already, so you need to kill the Sabine first, which is not that difficult to do in this deck. We have plenty of answers to Sabine. Including Battalion, without the need to even have Krennic in play, by the way. So yeah, Steadfast Battalion is our anti-Boba, anti-Luke Skywalker, anti-Krennic, and card that we're going to be using with ECL to just deal a bunch of damage and kill that unit. And then the Steadfast Battalions, once again, once it's been ambushed, it is now a damage unit, gets a +1 attack, with Krennic, which is great. So just a great card. Moving on, we got Darth Vader. So Darth Vader is the strongest deck for Darth Vader. So Darth Vader is, as you know, the best 7-drop in the game. And in the context of this deck, it is absolutely amazing. It is, as I said, it is the best possible deck for Vader. Why is that the case? Well, first of all, Ambush, once again, very good combo with Krennic, because you attack something, you kill something, Darth Vader is now damaged, gets a +1 attack bonus. So if your opponent does not deal with Vader, Vader puts more pressure, it gives you better barrage. It's just excellent. Second reason, we have the best card to pull out of Vader. Typically, the 2 cards we're going to be looking for is if we want to stabilize the board, Cell Block Guard. If we want to kill large units, Vader is your king. Basically, one of the main advantages of Vader in blue is that you can combine Vader plus Death Trooper, which gives you 5 damage from Vader, plus 2 damage with Death Trooper. That is a total of 7 damage. And you can kill like this. You can kill a Boba leader that has 7 HP in one shot, which is just extremely valuable. One of the great strengths of this deck compared to other decks in the meta is like Krennic has by far the most amount of cards that can one-shot a Boba, and that is very, very valuable. Another great thing about specifically, so this you can also do with Aiden, but what is great about Vader in Krennic is that if you're playing in someone who plays Vader as a leader, who happens to have 8 HP, you can actually use Death Trooper to, instead of damaging himself, is going to damage the Vader. So the Vader is going to go up to 6 attack before the ambush. So you play Vader, you resolve the Death Trooper, his ability first. You get the Death Trooper, damage Vader, damage 2 damage to the Vader, and then you resolve the ambush after, and the Vader has now 6 attack and can finish off the opponent Vader. I'm talking about Vader leader, the one that has 8 HP. So that's one of the few things, like this combination can actually kill something that has 8 HP, which is huge in certain matchups. Moving on, we got Reinforcement Walker, which is another great game stabilizer and a great A-drop, late game A-drop. Comes to play, allows us to draw cards or heal. Extremely difficult to kill. Basically the best A-drop we can have access to in this color combination. So just an excellent card. Very good against aggro as well. Even against aggro, if you manage to play Reinforcement Walker faster, this 3 HP just makes a huge difference. So now we're going to talk about the removal package, starting by Power of the Dark Side, which is, in my opinion, the most powerful, one of the most powerful card in the deck, and one of the most powerful blue-black card, and the main reason to be playing a blue-black control deck. Power of the Dark Side is just an extremely efficient removal, being able to kill something of any size for only 3 resources. So yes, your opponent gets to choose, but here's the thing: you play so many removal in your deck that your opponent is unlikely to have so many units on the board, and it can become very difficult for the opponent to play around Power of the Dark Side. So Power of the Dark Side is a lot weaker when your opponent plays around it, but here's the thing: it's not as easy to play around it when pretty much half of your deck is just removal, or you need that can be turned into removal. So it's just an excellent card, and to me it is the main reason to play this deck. It's just an insanely powerful removal. Then we got Takedown. So Takedown is very complementary with Power of the Dark Side because you can play, you can kill units that defeat a unit with 5 or less remaining HP. One of the main advantages of blue in general as a color is that it kills things regardless of the amount of shield they have on them. So it's very good against Luke, and it's very good against Boba, which also has quite a few units with shield. So yeah, Takedown is just a classic solid blue card. Not as flashy as Power of the Dark Side, but still a card you want to see in your control deck. Next, you obviously have Overwhelming Barrage. I don't think this deck would exist without this card. It's the way we can kill multiple units at once and stabilize the board. Overwhelming Barrage arguably is a bit better in Aiden, because Aiden with 4 attacks, but it remains very powerful in Krennic, especially when our unit very easily can get like +1 bonus attacks from being damaged. So for example, you can set up Barrage on your Death Trooper, you can set up Barrage on your Seasoned Shore Trooper, so Barrage at 6 fairly easily that way. Excellent card with Gideon if you can set that up. It's one of the strongest things this deck can do. Vanquish is obviously here as a complement to kill much larger units. We play 1 Vanquish in the main deck and 1 Vanquish in the sideboard. It's mostly a card that is meant to be dealing with Fire Spray. I think Fire Spray is probably the #1 unit that we want to kill using that card, because Fire Spray without it is a lot more difficult to kill, generally speaking. So Vanquish is mostly here for that, and it is an excellent card in general. It's just a very good card, but it's expensive, so we don't want to play too many of them. You can make an argument of having 3 of them in your 60 cards between your sideboard and your main deck. I went for a 1-1 split, but once again, it's something you can adapt depending on your environment. Next, we got Super Laser Blast. So Super Laser Blast is basically the Wrath effect. And some people might think that this is the ultimate card for control, and it is in a sense. But in this game, Super Laser Blast is simply just very expensive. And that's is very prohibitive cost makes it difficult to play in certain matchups, which means that the card is far more situational than a Wrath would be in Magic the Gathering, for example. So obviously, I think Super Laser Blast is a very powerful option to have because it's a card that does something that no other card in the game can do. And for that reason alone, you should be playing some Super Laser Blast either in your main or in the sideboard. I decided to go for a 1-1 split, so one in the main deck, one in the sideboard. The reason I want one in my main deck is because I want my opponent to respect the fact that I can draw Super Laser Blast. If my opponent, especially if you're playing a tournament where there's open deck list, your opponent has to respect that Super Laser Blast is a thing. He's going to play differently because you have this card in your deck. And this alone makes the card that you must play this card in your deck, because even without playing it, even without drawing it, this card, the presence of this card, changes the way your opponent plays. He might, for example, he might not overcome it. There is a unit that he would have played otherwise that he didn't decide to play because he didn't want it to get blown out by Super Laser Blast. There's sometimes where he took the initiative prematurely because he was afraid of Blast. There's plenty of situations where Super Laser Blast has an impact on the game, even without being played. And for that reason alone, you should always play Super Laser Blast in your main deck, especially in a deck that has open deck list. Then, of course, this card is better against mid-range and is better against other control deck. It's bad against aggro because it comes to play too late, even though we have ability to ramp. It is often a card that you want to play when you have a high amount of HP, because your opponent can always follow that up with for a cause I believe in and that kind of stuff. So personally, this card is awful against aggro, but it's very strong everywhere else. So it's a card I like to play, one in the main, one in the sideboard. And a card that you should be playing at least a 2 of, and I think you can justify your 3 of as well, no problem. So next we're going to talk about the sideboard. So in the sideboard we start, so I'm just going to, so the sideboard as usual, because we have a lot of anti-aggro card in the main deck, the sideboard is mostly focused on dealing with the control matchup to improve our control matchup, but there's also a few anti-aggro cards in there. So first, we have 3 copies of Make an Opening. And Make an Opening is a card that is going to be good in 2 matchups typically. The first matchup is going to be against Boba, because it can kill the 7th Fleet Defender and this Crafty Smuggler in one shot, which is great. And also here your base, which is very valuable against Boba. So against Boba Green, Boba Yellow, excellent card. I like this card also against aggro. It's not as good against aggro, but it still is decent. Once again, kill something, deals 2 damage. No, it doesn't kill much on by itself, but unit will get damage throughout the duration of the game very easily, so you can just play the Make an Opening to complete that. So it's a good complement as well with Power of the Dark Side. There's a ship unit to kill that ship unit, and then kill the big unit with the Power of the Dark Side. It's a good complement. Those 2 cards complement each other pretty well. I have this as a 3 off in the sideboard. You can justify going down to 2. You can justify putting them in the main deck. It really depends on your environment. As I said, it's a control list, it's a reactive list, nothing is set in stone. Think about it as what do you want to beat, and adapt your deck in consequence. 2 additional copies of System Patrol Craft to reinforce our space arena against, notably against aggro, but it's not a bad card against Boba as well. Can justify having this against Boba to block the fire sprays that can be a big problem, and give us the time that we need to kill those fire spray with a takedown or with a barrage or something like that. But obviously it is mostly here for the aggro matchup to block the space area, just an excellent anti-aggro card. An additional copies of Vanquish, mostly for the Boba matchup, but also very good against the mirror in the control mirror to kill very large enemy units. Super Laser Blast is obviously here for the control matchup, having the ability to reset the board, just extremely valuable in this matchup. I want to say Super Laser Blast is the kind of card that is very helpful, especially when you're behind, and that's exactly the kind of card that we want. Then we have additional late game card for the super late game matchups to turn our deck into a late game powerhouse. And among those cards, we are playing Avenger. Avenger is immediate impact on the game, opponent defeat a non-leader unit it controls, and then you can repeat that effect every time you attack, just extremely oppressive. I used to be a very big fan of Avenger, and I've cooled down on this card a lot. And what happens is that something that I didn't realize at first is that Avenger cannot kill a unit by attacking it and kill a unit by using his ability. You kind of have to choose between one of the two. And so typically the scenario would be you play Avenger, and if you want to, and there's two units on the battlefield, one, let's say one in space and one on the ground, and you want to attack and kill the unit in space by attacking it, and then you want to use the sacrifice trigger to kill another unit. Well, that doesn't work, because your opponent will choose the unit that's being attacked and sacrifice that unit, so your Avenger is simply just going to attack in the void. So you can't do that. So the Avenger really can only kill one unit per turn, maximum. And that makes the card a lot worse than I initially thought. Still a good card, but it's not simply not as good as it used to be. That's what I wanted to say. So we play this as a one-of to get something to play on turn 9 that is very powerful, very powerful. It's a great card to follow up with Super Laser Blast. You play Super Laser Blast, and the board becomes empty. Your opponent has very few units on the battlefield, and then you play Avenger as well. So it's an excellent follow-up to Super Laser Blast. But in other situations, it's not as great of a stabilizer as some other card, like Reinforcement Walker, or even better, the card that we can talk about later, which is Devastator. So Devastator really is really an ultimate bolt stabilizer. It is very expensive, but that's why it's in the sideboard. But it is such a powerhouse when you draw it in the Mirror of Control. Just a 10-10 that does 10 damage when it comes to play, kill pretty much anything, and the Sentinel also stabilize the board as well. Just an excellent card in the Mirror of Control. That's why we play two of to complete our anti-control package. And here it is. This is the list. This is the my take on the Krennic list. As I said, many cards can shift around. Many things can be swapped. There's many cards that are not even featured in this list that you can add. For example, you can improve your control matchup by playing some Kondoku, some more late game. I don't play Kondoku because I always want to play Vader in priority. I think Vader is so much better than Kondoku. And but if I want once again a bit more better late game, you can add more Kondoku. You can also play Piet, especially if you play Kondoku, then Piet becomes a lot better. So you can play Piet in the early stage of the game, like I do in my Vader list. You can so you can improve your control matchup that way. You can decide to improve your aggro matchup. You can even play some Repair in your sideboard. Repair is excellent against for a cause I believe in. So I personally I'm a big fan of Repair as well. So yeah, it's if you want to make your Boba matchup even better, you can play more Vanquish in this main deck. You can play more Steadfast Battalion in the main deck. There's like a lot of things you can do. But this is kind of the list I wanted to start off with. You can also place more Super Laser Blast. It's simply just it really depends on your environment, and this is what you need to learn. Krennic is not just as simple as just a control list in general. Is just as simple as copy pasting a list from the internet. You have to really take into account what kind of meta we want. So then let's talk about the matchup. So basically, my experience with Krennic is that it has a decent matchup against everything depending on the build. So this build in particular, so I'm going to talk about this build in particular. This build in particular do relatively well, really well against aggro, because it has tons of anti-aggro cards into the main deck. It has the Cell Guard, Super Trollcraft, the Constant Sums Viper. It's not so late game oriented. It's not super late game oriented compared to other lists. And Krennic is really strong against aggro, as long as you're playing around Steadfast Battalion. As long as you don't get blown out by Steadfast Battalions, Krennic is so strong against aggro because it can attack every turn and heal you every turn, and there's just so much, it requires so much resources from your opponent to kill the Krennic. It's just absolutely unreal. So this list, I think this list was relatively well against Boba. I think if you are playing this against Boba, expect a 50-50 matchup. And against Control, this is where the list in particular is a little bit weaker to Control, because the late game in the main deck is not so great. Again, if you run against a Control list that is a bit greedier, it's going to have trouble. It's going to have trouble versus Vader, because Vader is going to have a much better late game than you. But this is fixable with the sideboard. After sideboard, it gets a lot better, because suddenly you got a second copy Super Laser Blast, you get Avenger, you got Devastator. That changes a lot after the sideboard. So now let's talk about let's do some traditional mulligan few hands and see how things go. So let me draw here this first hand. This is an excellent hand. We can resource one of the Viper, one of the Vader, go with a turn 1 Viper that can interact with the opponent, and then play the resupply on turn 2. And then Barrage is one of the best cards in the deck. Vader is one of the best cards in the deck. Very happy. This is a really good hand. Okay, this hand here is also pretty good. We got a turn 1 Inferno 4. We got if we play against aggro, we can follow that with a Consume Sty Viper. Hopefully the opponent does not dodge the arena too hard, then it could be a problem. If you're not playing against this, we can simply just go for Super Laser Technician. If your opponent decides to dodge the arena and go on the ground, we can just ambush a Super Laser Technician, or plays just normally a Super Laser Technician, gets our Krennic 1 turn faster, and do a Krennic plus Traitorous turn, which can be very strong. Typically here, I would resource the resupply and the takedown. For example, this is one of the key difference here with Vader, is like in Vader, I would never resource a resupply that early in the game, because 2 ramps is very strong in Vader. If I'm playing Krennic, it's a bit different. If I'm playing Krennic, I'm mostly looking to interact with my opponent, so I will definitely resource one of the resupply, and 1 ramp is going to be enough for me. So that's a kind of a major difference here on the way you see ramp in a Krennic deck versus when you see ramp in a Vader deck. Obviously, I would resource Star Viper if I'm playing against something that's not aggro, that kind of thing. But it's a good hand. Okay, this hand is bad. You have nothing to play on turn 1, so you would absolutely mulligan a hand like this. Yeah, nothing to play until Patrolcraft and no ramp. This is a really terrible hand. Okay, so after mulligan, much better. Turn 1 Short Trooper, turn 2 Resupply, or turn 2 Death Trooper. Then you resource the Walker, and you have to resource one of the Barrage, I believe. And yeah, and then you get a Barrage to go with your Short Trooper, or to go with your Death Trooper. Both of those units will have 4 attacks eventually, making a Barrage just very powerful. Basically, you can go, yeah, it's just very good. Okay, this hand is pretty decent. We can go Inferno 4 or Back Pursuer, then Cell Blow Guard. No ramp on it, not as good as the previous hand we had, but still a pretty decent hand. And one last hand for the road. Okay, this is a very good hand because we got the Scout Back Pursuer Death Trooper combo. So basically, you go Scout Back Pursuer, then you can play Death Trooper, damage the Pursuer, suddenly Pursuer becomes a 4-2. Which is very, very oppressive. It becomes a 4-2 and you can start like pounding. Got removal spell, just an excellent hand. And there you have it. If you got any questions, feel free to post it on the comments below. We'll see you next time for another deck tech video or something else. Thank you, and please like and subscribe if you like the content.